Now, as I say, we're going to make a start with the conflict in the Middle East, but in particular, the context within which that's set and tracing it back through history. So we'll go to Vanessa now in Lebanon.
What I wanted to do today is to basically show a roadmap for the war that is currently being waged against Iran that began a long time ago. But let's look at 2009 and the Brookings Institute paper, Which Path to Persia? If we can just have a look at the actual slide itself. Options for a new American strategy toward Iran. Now, the Brookings Institute is one of the heavyweights among the so-called think tanks with connections to the State Department, to the military, Ministry of Defense, and also in 1952 received funding from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. So they're very influential. So let's have a look at this actual strategy paper. The link will be up in the show notes so people can go through it at will. It's 170 pages. So which path to Persia? So this is the part one, the trouble with Iran, US policy options towards Iran. And part one is basically dissuading Tehran, ironically called the diplomatic option. So let's have a look at what that actually entails. So we then have a chapter. Could we just have the next slide, please? So first of all, chapter one, an offer Iran shouldn't refuse. So this began back in 2005. Through the method of persuasion, which of course we're all well aware of with regards to COVID and to various other regional wars, particularly against Iraq and Syria with the weapons of mass destruction and so on. So in 2005, Bush was already trying to persuade Iran to halt any kind of nuclear development, even though, of course, at that point they were also not looking at developing nuclear weapons. So if we actually have a look at this slide, it shows basically that the nuclear weapon gag has been running for about 30 years. People can freeze frame this. Obviously, the writing is very small. They can freeze frame and have a look at all of the accusations levied at Iran for the last 30 years of having or wanting to develop nuclear weapons. And then 2012, this was Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, at the UNGA, who of course showed his nuclear bomb image at the UNGA. And then moving on back to the actual paper itself, and in the second part in the paper, if we can just have the slide, please. Sorry. Tempting, so this is chapter 2, Tempting Iran, the engagement option, which is basically, again, related very much to the negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. And then moving on to the following chapter, which is related to disarming Tehran, the military option. If we can again, sorry, thank you. Chapter 3, going all the way, which would involve US invasion. Chapter 4, the Osiraq option, which would include airstrikes. Now that relates to Operation Opera, a Zionist operation back in 1981. In 77, Mossad claimed to have found that Iraq under Saddam Hussein was developing a plutonium reactor, and they bombed the Osiraq plant in Iraq in 1981. And it then became known as the Begin Doctrine, which basically, if an Arab leader calls for the destruction of Israel, they will not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. So again, putting historical context onto this. And then part 3 of the actual Which Path to Persia, which includes regime change, not surprising there. Chapter 6, the Velvet Revolution, supporting a popular uprising, which is very similar, of course, to what we saw back in 2022, with a Western orchestrated uprising under the pretext of women's rights. And of course, we all know how women's rights are doing now in Syria, that the West has imposed their Al-Qaeda unelected government there. Chapter 7, inspiring an insurgency, supporting Iranian minority and opposition groups. And again, the West has been doing that for a very long time with the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Khalq terrorist group. Chapter 8, the coup, supporting a military move against the regime, weaponizing the Iranian military against their own government. Then moving on to part 4, which is deterring Tehran. And this is known as containment in the document. So this is basically relating to if they fail in all other strategies. Chapter 9 is accepting the unacceptable, and containment, preventing Iran from expanding beyond its borders, but potentially allowing it its nuclear program. And of course, not forgetting that going from Bush to Obama to Trump and Trump again, there has been this vacillation, Trump pulling out of the nuclear deal and then changing all of the conditions to the nuclear deal from, yes, they can enrich uranium, to no, they can't, to they must stop their entire missile program. And of course, Iran has stoically stuck by its red lines, which are that it can enrich uranium. It just will not develop a nuclear bomb, and it's not going to stop its missile program. And then, of course, moving on to the Samson option, this is Israel's plan to basically use nuclear weapons if it feels that it's under existential threat. This is from the article in The Progressive. So the Samson option is not designed to deter a nuclear adversary from a first strike or counterstrike. Israel is the only nuclear armed state in the region. Rather, its purported purpose is to ensure Israel's survival. Nuclear weapons would be deliberately used against a non-nuclear adversary as a last resort to prevent an Israeli defeat. So clearly, Israel is the nuclear threat in the region. Now, it's costing Israel $300 million per night to intercept the current missiles coming in from Iran at the level that they're coming in. There are 3 possibilities now. Either Israel will declare a mission accomplished and declare victory regardless. According to the Washington Post, they only have about another 12 days of being able to actually intercept Iranian missiles until their air defense batteries basically stop working. They will potentially use the nuclear threat, or of course there is also potential for US and UK involvement, which will lead to the devastation of the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states, the closure of the Hormuz Straits, and the triggering of the resistance factions in the region against US bases. So I just want to finally bring in Sayed Morandi, a professor at Tehran University, speaking to Sky News on exactly what Iran is going to do to deal with this latest round of Zionist aggression.
Iran will not hit back harder. Iran will hit back much harder. The head of the Iranian forces says Iran will target and destroy all of the Israeli regime's infrastructure. This was the tip of the iceberg. Iran will lose no war. The Israeli regime will. It is time for you and others to end your racism and to end your support for the superior race, and to accept that all people in Palestine have equal rights, and the Palestinian people have a right of return. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are equal. Unlike what you say, they are equal, and we will accept nothing less than that. The regime must go, and all people must be treated equally. Right. And if the only thing, there's no doubt that Israel will lose, but the only variable here is the United States. If the United States gets involved, have no doubt, the U.S. will be swept out of Iraq by the Iraqi resistance, and all its assets in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed.
So I think the message really to take away from this is that nothing happens by coincidence or by accident or suddenly. It is pre-planned, and the roadmap runs through bipartisan presidents from the instigation of these projects.
Absolutely, Vanessa. Yes, coincidences do not take place in this fashion. And that's absolutely critical context, which people are not having being brought to them by the mainstream, of course. Now, we are aware that we're having a few technical problems with the delivery of this program. This is not entirely unusual and reflects what it is that we do. So I apologize for that. We are going to stick with it. So if you can stick with us, that would be fantastic. Now, context is everything, as we say repeatedly. And to that end, we're now going to look at the Sustainable Development Goals from Ben.